Welcome to the English Podcast.
For listening and speaking.
You're walking through a bustling night market in Bangkok, where the air that dances around you is thick with steam, spices, and the sound of sizzling woks that have been seasoned by countless meals.
A vendor who speaks no English catches your eye, points to a dish that looks absolutely mysterious, and suddenly you're both gesturing wildly, laughing, and somehow communicating through the universal language of food.
Welcome to English Podcast for Listening and Speaking. I'm Emily, and that beautiful scenario I just painted, that's exactly the magic we're diving into today.
And I'm Brian, your slightly more skeptical but equally food-obsessed co-host. Though I have to say, Emily, your Bangkok story sounds lovely, but let's be honest, most of us would probably end up pointing at chicken and rice anyway.
Oh, Brian, you're missing the point entirely. Today, we're exploring how food becomes the bridge that connects us across cultures, languages, and even the barriers that we think separate us.
I'll admit, there's something profound about sharing a meal with someone whose language you don't speak. The food that brings us together often tells stories that words can't capture.
Exactly. And for our English learners listening today, we're going to use food as our vehicle for mastering relative clauses, those incredibly useful grammar structures that help us connect ideas beautifully.
For those just joining us, relative clauses are the grammar tools that let you add extra information to sentences. Like when I say, "the restaurant that changed my life," or "the grandmother whose recipes I treasure."
And we'll be using words like who, which, that, and whose constantly today because food stories are perfect for practicing these connections. Let me give you a taste of what's coming.
We'll start with first encounter stories. You know, those moments when you tried something that completely surprised you. Then we're heading to street food stalls where the real cultural magic happens.
After that, we're sitting down at family tables around the world, experiencing those intimate moments where food becomes identity. Then Brian and I are going to have a friendly debate about fusion versus tradition.
A debate that I'm definitely going to win, by the way. We'll also have an intensive grammar workshop, and we're ending with something that might just go viral. You'll have to stick around to find out what that is.
But first, let me share something personal. My relationship with food as a cultural bridge started when I was 12, visiting my grandmother who had immigrated from Italy decades earlier. She had this tiny kitchen that always smelled like garlic and oregano, and she would spend entire afternoons teaching me to make pasta by hand, speaking in broken English mixed with rapid Italian that I barely understood.
That's beautiful, Emily. Notice how you just used "that always smelled," a perfect relative clause that adds sensory detail to your story. Food memories often come with those vivid descriptions that make stories come alive.
Yes, and even though we struggled with words, when we cooked together, everything made perfect sense. The food was the language that connected us across generations and linguistic barriers.
My story's quite different. I grew up in a house where we rarely cooked anything that wasn't microwaved or delivered, but everything changed during a business trip to Seoul 5 years ago. I ended up at this tiny restaurant whose owner spoke about 3 words of English. I pointed at what someone else was eating, and she brought me this incredible, a stew that was nothing like I'd ever tasted.
Oh, I love this already. Tell me more about that moment when you realized food could be a conversation without words.
Well, the owner kept bringing me little dishes that I hadn't ordered. Banchan, which are these small side dishes that accompany Korean meals. She'd watch my reactions, smile when I liked something, and adjust what she brought next. It was like she was reading my palate, teaching me about her culture one flavor at a time. By the end of the meal, we were both laughing, and I felt more connected to Korean culture than any guidebook could have achieved.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. Food becomes this incredible teacher that shows us how cultures express love, hospitality, tradition, and innovation all on one plate.
And for our English learners, these food experiences are perfect for practicing descriptive language. We naturally use relative clauses when we talk about food because we're always adding details about flavors, origins, and memories.
Before we dive deeper, I want to ask our listeners something. Think about a food memory that changed your perspective on another culture. What was the dish that surprised you? Where were you when it happened?
And as you think about that memory, practice describing it with relative clauses. Start with, "It was a dish that," or "I met someone who." Let the grammar flow naturally with your storytelling.
We also want you to share these stories with us. Head to our website and record a voice message telling us about your food bridge moment. We'll feature the best ones in upcoming episodes.
Now, why does food work so brilliantly for language learning? Think about it. Eating is one of the most social, sensory, and emotional experiences we have as humans.
Exactly. When we talk about food, we engage all our senses. We tell stories, we express preferences, we make comparisons, and we connect with our emotions. It's like a complete language workout in every conversation.
Plus, food vocabulary is immediately useful. Whether you're traveling, living abroad, or just trying to connect with people from different cultures, knowing how to talk about food opens doors everywhere.
And here's something beautiful. When we share food stories, we naturally use past tense with relative clauses, which is perfect for intermediate and advanced English learners who want to sound more fluent and natural.
All right, I can see Emily is practically bouncing in her chair with excitement to get started. But before we move on, listeners, here's your first challenge for today.
Yes, I want you to think of 3 foods that represent your cultural background, then describe each one using a relative clause. For example, dumplings are the comfort food that reminds me of home.
Practice this out loud and don't worry about perfection. The goal is to get comfortable linking ideas naturally. Ready to dive into our first major section? Let's explore those first bite moments that change everything.
Let me take you back to a moment that completely shifted my understanding of what food could be. I was 22, backpacking through Morocco, feeling completely overwhelmed by the chaos and beauty of Marrakesh. I wandered into this tiny restaurant that had no sign, no menu in English, just the smell of spices that seemed to dance in the air around me. The owner, a woman who spoke French and Arabic, gestured for me to sit.
I love how you just used "who spoke French and Arabic." That's a perfect defining relative clause that gives us essential information about the woman. Keep going. This sounds fascinating.
She brought me this tagine, a slow-cooked stew that was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. The meat was so tender it fell apart at the touch of my fork, and the flavors were this incredible symphony of sweet and savory. But here's the amazing part. As I ate, other customers started talking to me in broken English, pointing at the food, teaching me the Arabic names for different spices, and suddenly this language barrier that seemed so intimidating just melted away.
That's the power of food right there. You know, my first transformative food experience was much closer to home, but equally eye-opening. It was at a family barbecue when I was about 15. My neighbor, who had recently moved from El Salvador, invited us over. I expected typical American barbecue food: hamburgers, hot dogs, potato salad that comes from a store-bought container.
Oh no, Brian, please tell me you discovered something amazing instead of just complaining about store-bought potato salad.
Actually, yes, they had pupusas. These thick corn tortillas that were stuffed with cheese and beans, cooked on a griddle until golden and crispy. I'd never heard of them before. But what really struck me was watching the whole family work together, each person who had a role in the cooking process, from mixing the masa to flipping the pupusas on the comal.
That sounds like such a beautiful community experience. And I notice you used each person who had a role. Another great example of how food stories naturally create opportunities for relative clauses.
The father explained to me that pupusas weren't just food. They were a connection to home, to memories, to family traditions that had traveled thousands of miles. It was my first real lesson in how food carries culture.
This is exactly what I want our listeners to understand. Food isn't just sustenance. It's storytelling. It's memory keeping. It's a way of saying, this is who we are and where we come from.
Now, for our English learners, let's break down some key vocabulary from our stories. Emily mentioned tagine, a North African dish that gets its name from the clay pot which is used to cook it.
And Brian talked about pupusas, traditional Salvadoran food that consists of thick corn tortillas that are stuffed with various fillings. Notice how we naturally define these foods using relative clauses?
Let's practice some more food vocabulary with relative clauses. Dim sum. These are small Chinese dishes that are traditionally served with tea during brunch.
Paella, a Spanish rice dish that originated in Valencia and combines rice, saffron, and various proteins like seafood or chicken.
Pho, Vietnamese soup that features rice noodles in an aromatic broth that's often simmered for hours with bones and spices.
See how natural it feels to describe foods this way. When you encounter new cuisines, practice using relative clauses to explain what you're experiencing. It helps you process the information and communicate more clearly.
Now let's talk about those opinion starters that are so useful when discussing food experiences. In my opinion, I believe that. What strikes me about this dish is that.
Oh, and comparative language. This reminds me of, it's similar to, unlike anything I've tried before, more complex than I expected. These phrases help you connect new experiences to familiar ones.
Here's an interesting question for our listeners. Think about a time when food completely surprised you. Maybe it was a combination of flavors that shouldn't have worked but did.
Or perhaps it was a cooking method that was totally new to you, or even a social custom around eating that challenged your assumptions about how meals should be shared.
I'll give you another example from my travels. In Japan, I discovered okonomiyaki, a savory pancake that contains cabbage, flour, and various toppings that you cook yourself at the table. What amazed me wasn't just the food itself, but the interactive experience of cooking it yourself while chatting with friends whose English was limited, but whose enthusiasm was infectious.
That's such a perfect example of food as communication. The cooking process becomes the conversation, and you're learning about each other through actions and shared experience, rather than just words.
Exactly. And for English learners, these interactive food experiences are gold mines for vocabulary and cultural understanding. You learn cooking verbs, ingredient names, cultural customs all at once.
Speaking of learning opportunities, let's transition into our role play section where we're going to visit some street food stalls around the world. Brian, are you ready to practice ordering food in challenging situations?
Oh, this should be interesting. Just promise me we're not going to that Bangkok market where you expect me to be adventurous with mystery meat on sticks.
Too late, Brian. We're starting with a Thai street vendor who makes the most amazing pad Thai that you've ever imagined. And yes, there might be some ingredients that will challenge your comfort zone.
All right, listeners, let's set the scene. I'm a tourist in Bangkok. It's my first day, and I'm standing in front of a street food cart whose owner smiles warmly, but speaks very limited English.
Hello, welcome. You want pad Thai? I make best pad Thai that you ever taste. Very fresh, very delicious.
Hi, yes. I'd like to try the pad Thai. Could you tell me what ingredients are in it? I'm a bit nervous about spicy food that might be too hot for me.
Ah, no worry. I have rice noodles, egg, tofu, bean sprouts, and sauce that is sweet and little bit spicy. You like shrimp? Fresh shrimp, very good.
Shrimp sounds great, but could you make it mild? I'm not used to spicy food that is too intense. Maybe just a little bit of heat?
Of course. I make special for you. Not spicy, just flavor that makes you happy. You want peanuts on top? Crushed peanuts that give nice crunch?
Yes, that sounds perfect. How much will it cost? And how long does it take to prepare?
60 baht, very good price. I cook now, you wait maybe 5 minutes. You want drink? I have fresh coconut water that is cold and very refreshing.
Perfect. I'll take the coconut water too. Thank you so much for being patient with my questions.
Okay, let's pause there, listeners. Notice how we naturally used relative clauses throughout that conversation. Sauce that is sweet, food that might be too hot, peanuts that give nice crunch.
This is perfect for practicing polite language when ordering food. Phrases like, could you tell me, I'd like to try, and could you make it, show respect and help build rapport with vendors.
And asking about ingredients is crucial, not just for dietary restrictions, but because it shows genuine interest in the culture and helps you learn new vocabulary in context.
Now let's try a different scenario. We're at a Mexican taco truck in Los Angeles, and I'm feeling more adventurous. Emily, you're the friendly vendor who's excited to share authentic flavors.
Hola, amigo. You come to the right place. We have tacos that will change your life. What kind of meat do you like? We have carnitas. carne asada, al pastor.
Wow, those all sound amazing. I'm not familiar with al pastor. Could you explain what that is? I'm trying to be more adventurous with foods that are new to me.
Al pastor is pork that we marinate in chilies and spices, then cook on vertical spit like this. Very tender, little bit spicy, with pineapple that makes it sweet and tangy.
That sounds incredible. I'll try 2 al pastor tacos. What toppings do you recommend? And are there any salsas that pair particularly well with al pastor?
Perfect choice. I put onions, cilantro, little bit of lime that brings out the flavor. And try this salsa verde. Is tomatillo salsa that has just right amount of heat, not too crazy.
You know what? I trust your expertise completely. Make them exactly how you think they should be made. I want the authentic experience that locals would have.
Excellent. You are a customer that I love to serve. Someone who appreciates real Mexican food. I make them perfect for you. Just wait 2 minutes.
Excellent role play, Emily. Did everyone notice how showing curiosity and respect for the vendor's expertise creates such a positive interaction? That's the key to great cultural exchange through food.
And look at all the relative clauses we use naturally. Pork that we marinate, lime that brings out the flavor, customer that I love to serve. Food conversations are perfect for practicing this grammar structure.
Let's do one more quick scenario before we move on. This time we're at an Indian street food stall, and things are about to get very interesting. Emily, you're about to introduce me to something I've never heard of.
Namaste! You must try pani puri. These are crispy shells that you fill with spiced water, tamarind chutney, and potato mixture. Very popular street snack that everyone loves.
That sounds complicated. How exactly do I eat them? I don't want to look foolish trying to manage something that requires special technique.
No worries. I show you. You take the puri, which is this crispy shell, make small hole, fill with potato and chutneys, then put the spiced water that we call pani and eat whole thing in one bite.
One bite? That seems challenging. What happens if the shell breaks and all the liquid spills out?
Ha! That happens to everyone. It's part of the fun. Don't worry, I give you plenty to practice with. The shells that break just make you laugh and try again.
I love that attitude. Okay, I'm ready to embrace the messiness. Let's do this. How much for a plate that will teach me proper pani puri technique?
Listeners, this is such an important cultural lesson. Sometimes the best food experiences are the ones that push us out of our comfort zones and teach us that making mistakes is part of the joy.
Exactly. And notice how asking about technique shows respect for the culture while also helping you avoid embarrassment. Street food vendors usually love teaching curious customers about their specialties.
Now let's talk about etiquette and cultural considerations when eating street food around the world. These are crucial for making positive connections and showing respect.
In many Asian countries, it's perfectly acceptable to slurp noodles. In fact, it shows appreciation for the food. But in Western cultures, that might seem rude.
And tipping. In some countries, tipping street vendors is insulting because it implies they need charity. In others, it's expected. Always observe what locals do that are eating at the same place.
Payment methods vary too. Many street vendors prefer cash, especially small bills that make change easier. But increasingly, mobile payments are accepted in places where technology has advanced rapidly.
Here's your homework assignment for this section. Find a street food vendor or ethnic restaurant in your area where you can practice ordering something that's completely unfamiliar to you.
Use the phrases we practiced. Ask about ingredients, show curiosity about preparation methods, and most importantly, be willing to step outside your comfort zone. Food adventures await.
Speaking of adventures, are you ready to join us at family dinner tables around the world? Because things are about to get very personal and very meaningful as we explore food and identity.
There's something magical that happens when you're invited into someone's home to share a meal. The public mask comes down and you experience food that carries the weight of family history and personal memory.
Absolutely. Let me tell you about an evening that changed my entire perspective on what it means to belong somewhere. I was studying abroad in Greece, feeling homesick and disconnected. My host family, whose warmth had always been genuine but distant, invited me to join their Sunday dinner. Not the usual quick meal that we shared during weekdays, but their proper family gathering.
Oh, this sounds like it's going to be one of those stories that makes me emotional. Continue.
The grandmother, whose hands had been shaping phyllo dough for 70 years, taught me to make spanakopita from scratch. Every fold of the dough carried stories about surviving the war, about feeding children when there was barely enough food. As we cooked together, she told me about her own grandmother who had passed down the recipe, how each generation had adapted it based on what ingredients were available, but the essence remained the same.
I can already see the relative clauses forming in this story. The grandmother whose hands, stories about surviving. A recipe who had passed down. Food stories are naturally rich with these connecting words.
Yes, and when we finally sat down to eat, I wasn't just tasting spinach and feta cheese wrapped in phyllo. I was experiencing history, resilience, and the way that love gets folded into food across generations.
That's the power of family food traditions. They're not just recipes, they're cultural DNA, passed down through generations and carrying the essence of who we are and where we come from.
Brian, do you have a similar experience where family food traditions revealed something profound about cultural identity or belonging?
Actually, yes, but my story is quite different. It's about discovering traditions that I never knew existed in my own family, because they had been deliberately abandoned. My great-grandmother had immigrated from Poland, but by the time I knew my grandmother, all traces of Polish culture had been erased. No language, no customs, definitely no traditional foods.
Oh, wow. So this is about rediscovering lost connections through food? That's incredibly powerful.
Exactly. When I was in my 20s, I started researching family history and discovered that my great-grandmother had been known for making incredible pierogi, dumplings, that were apparently legendary in her community. I found an elderly Polish woman in my city whose family had known mine decades earlier, and she invited me to her kitchen to learn the pierogi recipe that my great-grandmother had once shared with her mother.
This is giving me chills. You were literally reconnecting with your cultural roots through food that had been lost for generations.
The amazing part was how familiar the process felt, even though I'd never done it before. Rolling the dough, spooning the filling, sealing the edges. My hands seemed to remember movements that I'd never learned. When I tasted those pierogi, filled with potato and farmer's cheese that had been seasoned with caramelized onions, it was like tasting a part of my identity that I never knew existed.
These stories perfectly illustrate how food carries so much more than nutrition. It carries memory, identity, belonging, and connection across time and space.
For our English learners, let's focus on some key grammar structures that come up naturally when we talk about family food traditions and cultural identity.
Whose is particularly important: the grandmother whose hands, the family whose traditions. This helps us show possession and connection in a very elegant way.
And where constructions, the kitchen where we learned, the country where she was born, the table where stories were shared. These help us connect places with experiences and memories.
When is crucial too. The moment when I understood, the evening when everything changed, the day when traditions were passed down. These structures help us frame significant experiences in time.
Let's practice some modal verbs that are useful when talking about family traditions and cultural customs. We used to gather. She would tell stories. The recipe could feed 20 people.
And for making suggestions about family food experiences, you should try, you might enjoy, you could ask, would you like to learn? These help us share cultural experiences respectfully.
Here's an interesting question for our listeners. How do food traditions in your family compare to the dominant culture where you live? Are there dishes that connect you to your heritage?
Or maybe you're like Brian, discovering traditions that were lost and trying to reconnect with cultural roots through food. There's no wrong way to explore your relationship with cultural identity through cuisine.
Let's explore another dimension of family food traditions. What happens when different cultural food traditions meet through marriage, immigration, or simply living in multicultural communities?
Oh, that's fascinating. I have friends whose holiday meals are these amazing fusion experiences where Korean dishes sit next to Italian ones, and somehow it all works perfectly together.
Those fusion family traditions often create the most interesting conversations about identity and belonging. Children who grow up in these households become natural cultural bridges themselves.
And the vocabulary that emerges from these experiences. You end up learning food words from multiple languages, understanding different cooking techniques, and developing a palate that appreciates diverse flavor profiles.
For English learners living in multicultural environments, these fusion food experiences provide incredible opportunities to practice comparative language and cultural description.
Here's a practical exercise. Think of a traditional dish from your culture and imagine how it might adapt to ingredients or cooking methods that are common in another culture you're familiar with.
Describe that fusion possibility using relative clauses. It's a dish that combines. These are flavors that complement. This is a technique that enhances. Practice connecting ideas about cultural adaptation through food.
Speaking of fusion and cultural adaptation, that brings us perfectly to our next section where Brian and I are going to have what I expect will be a very spirited discussion.
Oh no, Emily's getting that look in her eyes that means she's about to argue passionately for something. Listeners, prepare yourselves for a debate about fusion versus authenticity in food culture.
You bet I am, because this is one of the most important conversations we can have about food and cultural respect. How do we balance innovation with tradition? When does fusion become appropriation?
All right, Emily, I'll take the position that fusion cuisine represents natural cultural evolution and creativity. While you can argue for the importance of preserving authentic traditions, may the best argument win.
Challenge accepted. But first, let me establish that I'm not against fusion entirely. What I'm passionate about is ensuring that fusion happens with respect, understanding, and proper credit to the original cultures.
I completely agree with that foundation, Emily. But here's my perspective. Cuisine has always evolved through cultural contact. Italian tomatoes came from the Americas. Indian curry uses chilies that originated in Mexico. What we consider authentic today was often fusion cuisine that happened so long ago that we've forgotten the original mixing. Food evolves, and that evolution often creates something beautiful and new.
That's a fair historical point, Brian, but here's where I push back. There's a difference between natural cultural evolution that happens over centuries and modern fusion that sometimes strips traditional dishes of their cultural context and meaning. When a chef who has never lived in or deeply studied a culture takes traditional recipes and changes them dramatically for commercial purposes, without acknowledging the source or understanding the significance, that's problematic.
I hear you on the respect and acknowledgement issues, Emily, but doesn't creativity require some freedom to experiment? If we're too rigid about authenticity, don't we risk turning cuisine into museum pieces instead of living traditions?
But Brian, living traditions are maintained by the communities that created them. When fusion happens within those communities or with deep collaboration and respect, that's completely different from outsiders commodifying traditional foods.
Okay, I think we're actually closer in our views than it might sound. What if the key is intention and process? Fusion that involves collaboration, education, and proper crediting versus fusion that's purely commercial exploitation.
Exactly. And this is where it gets really interesting for English learners. Learning to discuss these nuanced cultural topics requires sophisticated language skills and cultural sensitivity.
Let's look at some opinion language that we've been using naturally in this debate. I believe that, in my perspective, here's where I push back. What if the key is?
And conditional language. If we're too rigid, when fusion happens, what would happen if? These structures help us explore hypothetical situations and complex cultural scenarios.
Second conditional is particularly useful for these discussions. If chefs always asked permission, fusion cuisine would be more respectful. If we preserved every tradition unchanged, food culture would become stagnant.
Let's give our listeners some vocabulary for discussing cultural authenticity and fusion. Appropriate, misrepresent, commodify, honors, preserve, evolve, collaborate, acknowledge.
And phrases for respectful debate. I see your point, but That's a fair argument, however. I'd like to challenge that by, what about the perspective that have you considered?
Now let me give you a real-world example that illustrates the complexity of this issue. Korean-Mexican fusion, which developed in Los Angeles through actual cultural contact between Korean immigrants and Mexican-American communities. Korean families who owned businesses in predominantly Latino neighborhoods started adapting their traditional techniques to local tastes and ingredients. Kimchi tacos emerged organically from real cultural interaction.
That's a perfect example of authentic fusion. It came from genuine cultural exchange, mutual respect, and communities that were actually sharing space and experiences. Both cultures were represented authentically.
Contrast that with a situation where someone who has never visited Korea or Mexico opens a Korean-Mexican restaurant based purely on what they think might be commercially successful. The intention and process matter enormously.
For our English learners, this kind of cultural analysis requires advanced critical thinking skills expressed through sophisticated language. It's not just about vocabulary, it's about nuanced argumentation.
Here's a discussion question for you to practice with friends or language partners. If you could create a fusion dish that respectfully combines your culture with another, what would it be and how would you approach it?
And think about the second conditional. If I were creating this fusion, I would research both cultures deeply. If I wanted to be respectful, I would collaborate with people from both traditions.
Let's also consider the global perspective on this debate. In some countries, fusion cuisine is embraced as a symbol of multiculturalism and innovation. In others, there's stronger emphasis on preserving traditional methods.
Neither approach is inherently right or wrong. The key is understanding the cultural context and being sensitive to how different communities feel about their culinary traditions being adapted or modified.
What I find most exciting about this debate is that it shows how food is never just about food. It's about identity, power, respect, creativity, tradition, and change all mixed together on one plate.
And for language learners, engaging with these complex cultural discussions in English helps you develop the skills needed for academic, professional, and social conversations about sensitive topics.
Before we move to our grammar workshop, I want to challenge our listeners. Find examples of fusion cuisine in your area and research the stories behind them. Who created them? What was their motivation? How do communities respond?
Practice discussing these examples using the debate language we've modeled today. And remember, there are no simple answers to these questions, which is exactly what makes them great for developing advanced English skills.
All right, everyone, it's time for our intensive grammar and phrase workshop. We've been using relative clauses naturally throughout today's episode, but now let's break down exactly how they work and when to use them.
Think of relative clauses as the bridge builders of English grammar. They connect ideas, add essential information, and help you create more sophisticated and flowing sentences.
Let's start with that, probably the most versatile relative pronoun. We use it for both people and things when the information is essential to understanding who or what we're talking about.
For example, the restaurant that serves authentic Thai food. Without "that serves authentic Thai food," we don't know which restaurant. The information is essential, so we use that.
Who is specifically for people when they're doing the action. The chef who taught me to cook, the grandmother who preserved family recipes, the customer who ordered something unusual.
Which is for things and often adds extra information that's interesting but not essential. This dish, which originated in northern Italy, has become popular worldwide.
Notice the commas around which originated in northern Italy? Those commas tell us the information is additional, not essential. If we removed it, the sentence would still make complete sense.
Whose shows possession and works for both people and things. The family whose recipe I learned. The country whose cuisine influenced this dish. The restaurant whose atmosphere felt like home.
Where connects places with actions or situations. The market where I bought spices. The kitchen where memories were made. The country where I discovered new flavors.
When links time with experiences. The moment when I tasted real Italian gelato. The evening when we shared stories over dinner. the season when mangoes are perfectly ripe.
Now let's practice. I'll give you a simple sentence and I want you to expand it using relative clauses. Ready? I tried a dish.
I tried a dish that completely surprised me with its complex flavors. See how the relative clause adds essential information about which dish and what was special about it?
Let's try another. The vendor smiled. How can we expand this to tell a richer story using relative clauses?
The vendor who had been selling street food for 30 years smiled when I complimented his cooking that reminded me of my grandmother's recipes.
Beautiful. Notice how we used who for the person, that for the cooking, and we created a much richer, more connected story. This is the power of relative clauses in natural storytelling.
Let's focus on some common mistakes. Don't use what as a relative pronoun in this way. Incorrect. The food what I ate was delicious. Correct. The food that I ate was delicious.
And be careful with prepositions. You can say, the restaurant that I went to, or more formally, the restaurant to which I went, but avoid the restaurant that I went to it.
Here's a practical exercise for food vocabulary with relative clauses. Describe your favorite dish using at least 3 different relative pronouns. Start with the basic dish, then layer on the details.
For example, my favorite dish is curry that comes from Thailand, which is a country whose cuisine balances sweet, sour, salty, and spicy flavors in ways that create perfect harmony.
Notice how that one sentence used that for essential information about the curry, which for additional information about Thailand, and whose to show possession of culinary characteristics.
Let's review some key food vocabulary that works perfectly with relative clauses. Ingredients that, flavors which, techniques whose, traditions that, recipes which.
And cooking verbs that often need relative clauses: marinated, simmered, grilled, fermented, seasoned. These actions usually need explanation about time, ingredients, or methods.
The meat that was marinated overnight, vegetables which were grilled to perfection, rice that was seasoned with exotic spices that transported me to another continent.
Here's your homework assignment. Write a paragraph about a memorable meal using at least 5 different relative clauses. Focus on making your story flow naturally while practicing these grammar structures.
Include details about the place where you ate, the person who served you, the flavors that surprised you, and the moment when you realized this meal was special.
Don't worry about perfection. The goal is to practice connecting ideas naturally. Read your paragraph aloud to hear how the relative clauses create flow and rhythm in your English.
For advanced learners, try varying your sentence structure. Mix defining and non-defining relative clauses, combine them with other grammar structures, and experiment with different relative pronouns.
Remember, the best way to master relative clauses is through practice with topics that genuinely interest you. Food provides endless opportunities because every dish has a story that needs connecting words.
All right, Brian. Are you ready for our grand finale? Because I have something planned that might just break the internet and inspire thousands of people to see food as their bridge to English mastery.
Emily, your excitement is infectious, but also slightly terrifying. What exactly are you planning for our closing that you think might go viral?
We're going to create a moment that captures everything we've talked about today. The power of food to connect cultures, the beauty of language learning through shared experiences, and the magic that happens when strangers become friends over a meal.
Listeners, imagine this. You're sitting at a table that stretches across the entire world, where every seat is filled with someone whose language, culture, and food traditions are different from yours.
But here's the incredible thing. Despite all those differences, you're all sharing stories, laughing together, and learning from each other because food has become your common language that transcends every barrier.
The person who's sitting next to you, whose grandmother's recipe you're tasting for the first time, is teaching you words in their language while you help them practice English pronunciation.
Across the table, someone whose childhood memories are wrapped up in the flavors of a dish that you've never heard of is explaining how each spice that they use carries the history of their homeland.
And you realize that this moment, where food becomes storytelling, where curiosity becomes connection, where difference becomes celebration, This is what learning English is really about.
It's not about perfect grammar or flawless pronunciation. It's about building bridges that connect hearts and minds across cultures, using language as the tool that helps us understand each other's humanity.
Every relative clause that you master, every new food vocabulary word that you learn, every conversation that you have about cultural traditions, these are all stepping stones toward that magical table where we all belong.
So here's our challenge to you, and this is where things get really exciting. We want you to create your own food bridge moment this week.
Find someone whose cultural background is different from yours. Maybe a neighbor, a classmate, a coworker, or someone you meet at a local market or restaurant.
Ask them about a food that represents their culture, their family, their memories. Listen to their story. Share your own. Practice the relative clauses and food vocabulary that we've explored today.
And then, and this is the viral moment Emily's been building toward, document that experience and share it with us using the hashtag #FoodBridgeChallenge.
Record a voice message telling us about the person you met, the food you discovered, and the English you practiced. We want to hear about the moment when food became your bridge to connection and learning.
But here's what makes this really special. We're not just collecting individual stories. We're building a global community of learners who understand that language learning is about building relationships, not just memorizing rules.
Every story you share becomes inspiration for someone else who might be nervous about starting conversations with strangers. Your courage creates courage in others.
Let's recap the incredible journey we've taken together today. We started with first bite moments that opened our minds to new possibilities.
We practiced ordering street food with confidence and respect, learning that curiosity and politeness open doors to authentic cultural exchange that textbooks can't provide.
We explored family tables where identity and belonging are served alongside traditional recipes that carry the weight of generations and the promise of continuity.
We wrestled with complex questions about fusion and authenticity, discovering that respect and understanding matter more than rigid rules when cultures meet and blend through food.
And we mastered relative clauses, those essential bridge-building tools that help you connect ideas, tell richer stories, and express complex thoughts with natural fluency.
But most importantly, we've proven that English learning doesn't have to be isolated or intimidating. It can be warm, welcoming, delicious, and deeply connected to real human experiences.
Remember, every time you use English to connect with someone over food, whether you're asking about ingredients, sharing cultural stories, or debating culinary philosophy, you're building the future we dream about.
A future where language barriers don't divide us, where cultural differences become sources of curiosity rather than fear, where every meal becomes an opportunity for understanding.
So go out there, be brave, be curious, be hungry, both for food and for connection. The world is waiting to share its flavors with you, and you have stories that others are eager to hear.
Visit our website to download transcripts, additional exercises, and to share your hashtag FoodBridgeChallenge stories. Follow us on social media where we celebrate every success and support every learner who's brave enough to try.
And remember, whether you're just starting your English journey or you're polishing advanced skills, you belong at this table where learning happens through joy, discovery, and shared humanity.
From all of us at English Podcast for Listening and Speaking, thank you for sharing this delicious hour with us. Until next time, keep learning, keep connecting, and keep building bridges through the beautiful universal language of food.
Now go forth and feast, both on food that nourishes your body and on experiences that expand your world. The table is set, the conversation is started, and your English adventure is just beginning. Bon appetit to learning.